Welcome to History Delights. This is an audio recording of the written history of the Iowa 32nd Volunteer Infantry Regiment. This history was compiled by members of the regiment and recorded and published in 1896. Please enjoy this recording and all of the other episodes of this continuing saga. Chapter 6. A good story is none the worse for being told by other witnesses, if they see the facts from different standpoints. Sergeant Boyd gives the view as presented to him, that of an enlisted man, with subordinate duties, and it must be agreed that he has well told the tale as his notes and memory served him. Major Eberhart, being in command of the detachment, was better informed, from necessity, of the reasons for various movements. He was accompanied by Assistant Surgeon Wasson, the only member of the regimental staff that could be spared, and had almost sole authority in the detachment. In a letter of recent date, Major Eberhart gives some of the details of the movements of the four companies, comprising the removal from Benton Barracks to Cape Girardeau and the occupation of that post. At the risk of some repetition, the compiler deems it proper to insert both versions, believing that those who were the actors will be equally interested in each of them. Colonel G. A. Eberhart. Major Eberhart says, at 12 p.m. of November 25, 1862, I marched companies A, D, F, and G from Benton Barracks, expecting to embark on steamer Arroyo for Cape Girardeau. Arriving at the landing, we found the steamer could carry but one company in addition to her cargo and passengers. Company A, T. Captain Cutler in command, was placed on board, and the steamer Isabella was assigned to transport the other companies to our destination. The companies D, F, and G were placed on board. Next morning, learning that the steamer would not leave St. Louis until the evening of the 27th, the detachment marched back to Benton Barracks to comfortable quarters. On the afternoon of the 27th, we again marched to the steamer, embarked, and at 6 p.m. moved out from the landing and started for Cape Girardeau, where we arrived at 5 p.m. next day. Before arrival of detachment, the garrison at Cape Girardeau was Captain Messner's Company D, 2nd Missouri Artillery, 150 men and officers. This company had been very thoroughly drilled during nearly a year's service on garrison duty, and were quite expert in the manual with their muskets. The manner in which our awkward squads handled our old Prussian muskets amused the Dutchmen, and they did not conceal the fact. The men began to interest themselves in the manual of arms and made the work of the officers comparatively easy, so that in 3 months our men had a poor opinion of the slow motions of the Dutchmen. In 6 months after landing at Cape Girardeau, the four companies were well drilled in manual, Kelton's bayonet exercise, marching in line, and all evolutions of company and battalion in the skirmish drill to bugle signals, and were not excelled by any regiment of volunteers we met in the service. As ordered, I assumed command of the post on December 1st and placed Lieutenant Charles A. Bannon of Company G on duty as Provost Marshal. After the weather became cold, we took possession of some buildings on Main Street, and obtaining lumber from an old mill above town, fitted up comfortable bunks. During the winter months, the rebels, Colonel M. Jeff Thompson and Colonel Jeffers, with several hundred partly armed troops, crossed the St. Francis River into Missouri, occupied Bloomfield and the roads leading to New Madrid and Cape Girardeau, threatening both points, but in no condition to attack either. On January 27, 1863, about 250 Missouri militia made a dash into Bloomfield and captured a large number of these men. General Marmaduke, after returning to Batesville, Arkansas, from his raid to Springfield, Missouri, about the last of January, wrote to Lieutenant General Holmes in command at Little Rock proposing a raid into southeast Missouri. Answering on February 16, Lieutenant General Holmes says, "Your plan is a bold one, but I think you are mistaken about the Missouri people. They are thoroughly cowed, and require an overwhelming force to assist if they raise their hands against their oppressors. Advise me where Blount's, Schofield's, and other federal forces are. Again on February 27th, Holmes, writing to Marmaduke, thinks if you go without a large force of infantry and must abandon Missouri, the friends will be left to a merciless foe who would not hesitate to destroy every man, woman, or child that showed you sympathy. You overestimate their zeal, underestimate the effect of the iron and diabolical rule of the enemy over there. They will refuse to lift a hand unless sure of protection. Ride Maryland, Kentucky, and Tennessee. The official returns made March 1st, 1863, by Confederate commanders place Marmaduke's command present for duty, officers 203, men 2,354, aggregate present 3,200, present and absent 5,163. Whole force in District of Arkansas for duty, officers 1,509, men 19,178, aggregate present 25,313, present and absent 41,305. On March 10th, Colonel Hughes at New Madrid sends message to headquarters that scouts report Marmaduke about to invade Missouri and strike Bloomfield. Colonel John McNeil, with his regiment of Missouri, occupied Bloomfield about the 1st of March, his advance driving out a small force of the enemy. His scouting parties met meeting considerable resistance in Arkansas and Missouri, south and west from Bloomfield. He called for reinforcements to be sent to Bloomfield. On March 13th, orders were received at Cape Girardeau directing 1st Wisconsin Cavalry, Colonel LaGrange, Detachment, 32nd Iowa Infantry, Major Eberhart, and Will Fly's Battery to march to Bloomfield and to report to Colonel McNeil. On March 14th, the command marched from Cape Girardeau, arriving at Bloomfield at 11:30 a.m. on 17th. On March 15th, while the reinforcements were marching to Bloomfield, General McNeil sent the following dispatch to headquarters at Cape Girardeau. I have just returned from a scout against Thompson. I have driven him from the state and captured half of his ragamuffins. Marmaduke now threatens me, and from the way I am reinforced, I expect they intend he shall have me and my regiment. Major, for God's sake, hurry up the command sent to me. Do get Welfrey to march night and day. Until he gets here with his battery, I shall not feel right. On March 21st, McNeil reports to Davidson that Marmaduke's advance is 7 miles from Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and on the 23rd he says, Marmaduke is not this side of Pocahontas if he has left Batesville. Then again on the 24th he says, Marmaduke is still at Batesville and cannot move before the middle of April. While at Bloomfield, the detachment had a comfortable place to camp. The time was passed in guard duty and drill, more attention being given to skirmish drill, using the bugle for signals. The guard duty was something more than at Cape Girardeau, and the men began to learn something of service. April 2nd to the 8th, Colonel Greene was on the march toward Doniphan, Missouri, and reported to General Marmaduke, who was at Powhatan, Arkansas. April 14th, Shelby crossed into Missouri and says, I hear McNeil is at Poplar Bluffs. If he is, I will find him. April 16th, Greene at Pittman's Ferry, Current River, Missouri. On the same day, General Davidson telegraphs McNeil, concentrate all your command at Bloomfield except one company at Chalk Bluff and one at Poplar Bluff. Be prepared to fall back by way of Dallas and Frederickstown so as to concentrate with the troops from Patterson and Pilot Knob. McNeil had at Bloomfield 2nd Missouri Cavalry, 1st Wisconsin Cavalry, 8 companies, 4th Missouri Cavalry, 4 companies, 32nd Iowa Infantry, and 8 guns from batteries, in all about 2,700 men. He decided to fortify and told General Davidson on April 20th he would send him plans. The camp of detachment was for this reason moved to the location where the works would be built. But on April 20th, Marmaduke was at Patterson, Missouri, 50 miles from Arkansas, captured the place, and on the 21st sent Carter's Texas Brigade with Pratt's battery against McNeil at Bloomfield, and sent Joe Shelby with his brigade to Frederickstown. Marmaduke's report states that he had 5,000 men and 10 guns. 1,200 men were unarmed and 900 dismounted. On the night of April 20th, orders were given to march out to Cape Girardeau Road at 4 a.m. the next day. The command moved about 5 a.m. and camped at night 28 miles from Bloomfield. The next day, the command marched to Dallas, part of the way through the swamps, and 2 miles of the distance through running water. Dallas was reached in the afternoon. Next forenoon, marched to Jackson because McNeil discovered that the rebels were between his troops and Pilot Knob. On the 24th, the command moved to Cape Girardeau. Carter reports that he pursued us to within 4 miles of that place. These separate accounts bring us again to Cape Girardeau on the evening of April 24th, having been absent since the morning of March 14th. Marmaduke was close upon the heels of McNeil, and the following morning disposed his forces for the capture of the place. He seems to have been met by an effective disposition of McNeil's limited force, and was repulsed, and with some loss. McNeil received some reinforcement from St. Louis during the engagement, and the incessant screaming of the whistles of the boats appears to have caused the enemy to greatly magnify the aid thus rendered. But for this, and some other blunders of Marmaduke, it was thought that he might have captured Cape Girardeau with important stores and material. The detachment of 32nd Iowa did good service. Some of them who had been on the advanced picket line fell back to a ravine between the contending forces, where, with no opportunity of firing a gun, the shot and shell passed both ways over their heads. It can certainly be said that these were under fire. The rebel gunners were quite careless, and some missiles fell among our boys, but none were struck. The body of the detachment held an important position that was not assailed, and happily no Iowa blood was shed in this affair. Marmaduke retreated on the Jackson Road. General Vandever was coming down from Pilot Knob and attacked Marmaduke next morning. There was an open way by the Bloomfield Road by which McNeil could have gained the Whitewater Bridge in front of Marmaduke and held him for Vandover. The men expected such a movement. It was not made, and Marmaduke got away. Such is war under incompetent commanders. Either force can be relied upon with much probability for a blunder that will neutralize the blunder of the opposing force. Afterwards, on paper, any of us can fight the battle to bring about another result. Had Marmaduke not blundered, he would have captured Cape Girardeau. Had McNeil and Vandever acted in concert, they would have captured Marmaduke. At daylight next morning, Vandever attacked Marmaduke. At 5 p.m. in a steady rain, the detachment started for Bloomfield, marched 5 miles, camped for the night. They were hardly settled until an order from Vandover for them to return to the Cape. Before they could get started, Colonel John C. Black of the 37th Illinois, later the famous pension commissioner, appeared and ordered Eberhart to move at once for Bloomfield. A short parley. Company A went to the Cape. The other 3 companies started to Bloomfield. An all-night march, much of it in the swamps, the men often sprawling in the black mud and water, and continuing until 4 p.m. the next day, brought the detachment into 6 miles from Bloomfield. After a running fight for 40 miles beyond Bloomfield, the enemy crossed the swollen St. Francis River and escaped from Vandever, who returned to Bloomfield. On this chase, some of the infantry marched more than 30 miles without food. The casualties were few, but the effect of such marches is disastrous and lasting.